Rachel Morgan still remembers her college graduation day in Chicago so clearly, not because it was the happiest day of her life, but because it was the first time she truly understood how painful it felt to be forgotten. That morning, Rachel stood in front of the mirror for a long time in the small apartment she rented near campus. She carefully adjusted the collar of her dark blue graduation gown, smoothing every wrinkle as if she were preparing for the most important moment of her life. And honestly, she was. 4 years of college, hundreds of sleepless nights, days of studying while working part-time until exhaustion. Rachel had made it to that day completely on her own, but the thing that made her heart race the most was not walking across the stage to receive her diploma. It was the thought of seeing her parents sitting in the audience, looking at her with pride. Just imagining that moment made her heart beat faster. When she arrived at the ceremony hall, it was already crowded. Laughter and conversations filled the air. Families stood holding flowers while waiting for their children. Some fathers kept adjusting their ties nervously because they were emotional. Some mothers were already crying before the ceremony even began. Rachel sat down in the student section and immediately looked toward the family seats. 2 seats in the third row were still empty. Her parents' seats. Rachel smiled softly. They're probably just stuck in traffic. She kept looking toward the entrance. Every time someone walked through the doors, her heart beat a little faster. One family rushed in to hug their daughter. A student laughed as his mother held up a giant sign with his name on it. And Rachel kept staring at that doorway, still waiting, still hoping. Because the night before, her mother had called and said, "I promise I won't miss this day." Rachel believed those words all night long. And maybe the saddest part was, even after spending so many years always coming second to Daniel, Aiya, Noien Shatai, a part of her still hoped that at least once in her life, her parents would choose her first. Have you ever waited for someone to show up during one of the most important moments of your life? That feeling of constantly looking toward the door and slowly realizing they may never come at all is something you never truly forget. Around her, laughter and conversations filled the hall without stopping. Families kept walking and holding flowers and cameras, ready to capture one of the most important moments of their children's lives. But Rachel could not stop looking toward the large doors at the back of the auditorium. The 2 seats reserved for her parents were still empty, and strangely enough, Rachel had not lost hope yet. A part of her still believed they would come. Because the night before, her mother had stayed on the phone with her for a long time, just to ask what color graduation gown she would be wearing. She had even smiled softly and said, "I want to see my daughter looking beautiful on her special day." Rachel carried those words with her all night long. She had even stayed awake until almost morning, carefully ironing her graduation gown one more time. Rachel knew it probably sounded foolish, but she had truly been looking forward to that day. Not because of the diploma, but because she wanted her parents to look at her with the same pride they had always shown Daniel. Every time another family walked into the auditorium, Rachel instinctively lifted her head. Not them. Then more people appeared. Still not them. She glanced quietly at the clock. The ceremony was only minutes away from starting. Rachel's heart began beating faster, but she kept trying to comfort herself. Maybe they're looking for parking. Maybe traffic is just bad. Because sometimes, when someone has spent their whole life waiting for love from other people, they hold on to even the smallest pieces of hope. Rachel looked around the room once again. A girl sitting in front of her was tightly hugging her mother while crying from happiness. Another father kept fixing his daughter's hair before the ceremony began. Rachel quietly watched those moments for a long time, and deep inside, she still hoped that any second now her parents would walk through those doors, smile at her, and say, "Sorry we're late." Just thinking about that possibility made Rachel's eyes begin to burn with tears. Have you ever waited for someone to show up during one of the most important moments of your life? That feeling of continuing to hope, even while part of you is starting to fear they may never come, hurts more than words can explain. Just as Rachel started convincing herself that maybe her parents were only a few minutes late, her phone suddenly vibrated. Her mother's name appeared on the screen. In that moment, Rachel almost instantly smiled. Her heart beat so hard that her hands trembled slightly as she answered the call. Because at that exact moment, there was only one thought in her mind. Maybe they're almost here. But the second the call connected, Rachel immediately felt that something was wrong. There was no laughter on the other end, no excitement. Only the sound of a car moving quickly and her mother's rushed voice. "Rachel, I'm sorry. The smile slowly disappeared from Rachel's face. She tightened her grip on the phone but still tried to keep her voice calm. "What happened, Mom?" Her mother went quiet for a few seconds before answering. "Daniel had a problem in Los Angeles. Your father and I have to go there right away." Rachel said nothing. Around her, the entire auditorium began filling with applause as the ceremony was about to begin. Some students were hugging their families, others were taking photos with their parents, and Rachel sat silently among hundreds of people in her graduation gown, feeling as though every sound around her was slowly fading away. Her mother continued speaking quickly. "Please understand your brother. We'll celebrate with you later." Celebrate later. Rachel did not know why, but those words hurt so deeply that her chest tightened, because some moments in life cannot be repeated later. Your first graduation, the moment you walk across the stage, the feeling of looking down into the audience searching for your parents, those things cannot simply be postponed. Rachel slowly lifted her eyes toward the empty seats once again, and for the first time in many years, she was no longer surprised, only disappointed. A very quiet kind of disappointment, the kind that happens when someone has hoped too many times, until their heart becomes exhausted from continuing to believe. Rachel forced a small smile and whispered softly into the phone, "It's okay, Mom." But the moment the call ended, she realized her eyes had already turned red. Have you ever pretended to be okay for someone else, while inside you were actually falling apart? Music echoed throughout the large auditorium as rows of students slowly stood up one by one, surrounded by applause and proud cheers from their families below. Rachel tried to keep a calm smile on her face, but deep inside, she felt an emptiness she could not explain. As the announcer began reading the names of each graduate, Rachel instinctively glanced toward the third row several more times. Her parents' two seats were still empty. No one rushed through the auditorium doors the way she had secretly hoped. No one smiled and waved to show they had finally arrived. Only that silent, empty space remained exactly where it had been all along. And somehow, that small, empty space made Rachel feel unbearably alone. When the name Rachel Morgan echoed through the speakers, the entire auditorium burst into applause. Rachel stood up and slowly walked across the stage in her dark blue graduation gown. The bright lights shining down made it difficult for her to clearly see the faces in the crowd below, but she still looked toward the family section one last time, still empty. And in that moment, Rachel felt something inside her quietly go still. She accepted her diploma with both hands, forcing herself to smile for the cameras like every other graduate. Around her, students were hugging their parents beneath the stage. Some were crying tears of happiness. Families proudly called out their children's names over and over again. But Rachel walked down from the stage alone. No one was waiting for her at the end of the aisle. No flowers, no hug. No one saying, "We're proud of you." And the saddest part for Rachel was not that her parents failed to come. It was the fact that deep down, a part of her had already known this would happen from the beginning. Some disappointments repeat themselves so many times that eventually they no longer make you cry. They only leave behind a deep emptiness, like finally achieving something you had dreamed about for years, only for the moment that was supposed to be the happiest of your life to feel strangely cold instead. Rachel tightened her grip on the diploma and quietly lowered her head as she walked through the sound of applause filling the auditorium. But never in her life had she felt so completely alone. After the ceremony ended, the auditorium became louder and more emotional than ever. Laughter echoed everywhere. Families called out to each other while taking photos, wrapping their children in emotional hugs. Large bouquets of flowers filled the walkways. Some mothers cried while holding their children tightly in their arms. Some fathers proudly kept telling everyone around them, "That's my daughter." Rachel stood quietly in the middle of that crowded room, still wearing her graduation gown because she had not even thought about changing yet. In her hands, she held only her diploma and the phone that had remained silent ever since the call from her mother. No new messages, no missed calls asking if the ceremony had already ended. Rachel slowly looked around one more time. Then she quietly walked out of the auditorium alone. The Chicago sky that afternoon was cloudy and colder than she expected. Rachel walked for a long time along the streets near the university, while groups of students laughed and celebrated behind her. Every now and then, she heard someone call out, "Mom, take one more picture for me." Such ordinary words. Yet somehow they made Rachel's chest ache so badly. Eventually, she stopped in front of a small restaurant near campus. Rachel chose a seat by the window and quietly sat down, still wearing her graduation gown. A waitress brought over a menu and smiled warmly. Is your family joining you soon? Rachel froze for a few seconds. Her throat suddenly tightened, but then she smiled softly, the same way she always did whenever she tried to hide her real feelings. They're a little busy. The waitress nodded kindly and walked away. Rachel remained sitting there alone while laughter and conversations from other families filled the restaurant around her. A bowl of hot noodles steamed in front of her, but she could barely taste anything anymore. For the first time in many years, Rachel felt loneliness so clearly. Not the kind of loneliness that comes from having no one around you, but the kind that comes from spending your whole life trying to become someone worthy of love, only to realize that the most important moments of your life still have to be faced alone. Rachel quietly looked at the diploma resting beside her. It had once been the thing she dreamed about for years, but that night, it made her feel more sadness than happiness. That night, Rachel returned to her small apartment as a light rain began falling over Chicago. She placed her graduation diploma on the table and sat quietly by the window for a very long time. In the silence of that small room, Rachel suddenly realized something that hurt even more than her parents not showing up to the ceremony. The most painful part was, a part of her had become far too familiar with being left behind, used to Daniel always being the first priority, used to facing the most important moments of her life alone. Rachel lifted her eyes toward the city lights reflecting against the rain-covered glass. She remembered how, when she was younger, she truly believed that if she worked hard enough, one day her parents would finally look at her with pride. But the older Rachel became, the more she slowly began to understand something painful. Some children grow up in families where love is shown clearly and naturally. And then there are people like her, who spend their entire youth teaching themselves how to be strong alone. That night, Rachel did not cry. She simply felt exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that comes from hoping over and over again, only to end up disappointed every time. And from that moment on, something inside Rachel quietly began to change. She still loved her family. But for the first time in her life, Rachel started asking herself, should I really keep living just to wait for their approval? What she did not know yet was that this was only the beginning. Because years later, Rachel would uncover many more truths about the Morgan family. Secrets, pain, and things that would slowly force her to realize what her true place in that family had always been. If you have ever felt like the quiet, overlooked person in your own family, keep following the journey of Rachel Morgan, because sometimes the people who stay silent the longest are the ones carrying the deepest pain inside.